There were things going out over our air that she was saying that were being at least received, I have to say, as being deeply anti-Semitic. The phrase, Christ is King, was being used as an anti-Semitic trope. We believe this. We believe that Christ is King. I also believe in the cross of Christ, but if you burn the cross on somebody's lawn, it's no longer the cross of Christ. It's just a vehicle, a symbol of your toxic hatred.
Just a clarification on this Christ is King. How is that used in an anti-Semitic way?
Well, I've gotten tweets that say Christ is King Jew, so that's kind of a giveaway for me.
Yeah.
Andrew Klavan, welcome back to TRIGGERnometry. You're one of our favorite ever guests. We love having you on the show over and over. So welcome.
Thank you. It's great to see you guys.
It's great to see you. We've got lots to talk to you about, as always, movies and culture and politics and stuff. I have to ask you, though, about the Daily Wire Candace Owens thing. Yeah. You're the only one of the Daily Wire hosts, as far as I'm aware, who said anything about it. What happened?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I just naturally thought it was going to be a big news story. It had to be addressed. So I knew it had happened, but it became public about an hour before I went on the air. So I went on the air and addressed it, which is what I do with everything. And at the end of what turned out to be like a 40-minute segment, usually in your ear, you hear the producer say, good job, or let's move on, or let's do this, whatever. I hear just dead air, nothing. And then I hear, no one else talked about this. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. What does it mean to not say something about it? And ever since, I've been the target of what they call the Groypers. I just call them Nazis because that's what they are. And it was kind of a painful thing because my interactions with Candace were all in the makeup room and were always incredibly friendly. I spotted her as a huge talent years before she took off. I mean, I saw her on YouTube when she had no followers virtually. She had a small following. I just thought that's one of the most talented broadcasters I've ever seen. I had her on my show. I told the Daily Wire to hire her, which they didn't, which cost them a lot of money when they hired her later. So I don't have any feelings about her whatsoever. And it's not a personal thing. And it's also not even, I don't even know her heart or what's in her mind. So I'm not attacking her at all. But there were things going out over our air that she was saying that were being at least received, I have to say, as being deeply anti-Semitic. So that Nick Fuentes, who is a virtual Nazi, I mean, there's no space between him and what a Nazi would be saying, was praising her to the skies. If Nick Fuentes praises me to the skies, I go out and say, no, I'm not on your side. I don't know what you mistook, but there was nothing coming back. And so it was becoming uncomfortable to be on the same, station, the same venue where that stuff was coming out. And so without ever having any kind of personal animus toward Candace, or even knowing what it was she intended. I'm not even saying that was, how she intended it to be received. It simply became impossible to have a good feeling about this place that I helped build and that I love very much and that I'm very proud of, as an entity. And it was very painful to have that kind of stuff coming out over the air. And I did not want Nick Fuentes. I don't want Nick Fuentes' praise. I don't even want, I don't want him to have a happy day because of anything that I said. And so that was my basic reaction. And in that was involved the fact that some of this was being phrased in religious terms. And one of the ways this was happening was the phrase, Christ is King, was being used as an anti-Semitic trope. Now, as I said repeatedly on the show, as Jeremy Boring, who runs the Daily Wire, said repeatedly, we believe this. We believe that Christ is King. I also believe in the cross of Christ, but if you burn the cross on somebody's lawn, it's no longer the cross of Christ. It's just a vehicle, a symbol of your toxic hatred. And so the way it was being used online as an attack on Jews, was simply worth refuting. And that got me some heat from people who felt like, what are you talking about? This is a totally innocent phrase. So there was a lot of blowback from it, and I don't know why no one else addressed it. I thought it was important to address it. I'd do it again. No one asked me to address it.
Well, we're asking you now, and there was something I wanted to ask you about, Andrew, which is there is a kind of alternative theory that I've heard from various people, which is that anti-Semitism aside, really, Candace, as you say, is a very talented broadcaster. She looks fantastic on screen. She's very charismatic. She's great at communicating. And when the Daily Wire hired her, it was the right moment in which she was able to communicate, you know, let's be honest, the ideas of people like Thomas Sowell and Larry Elder to a younger, different audience. And that was great. But then other issues started to come along and became the current thing, as they say on the internet, whether that was the war in Ukraine, then Israel-Palestine. And then it was kind of the case that she didn't really know what she was talking about. You know, she wasn't covering those issues in a way that is serious. You know, speaking plainly, that's what some people have said to me. And then it descended into, you know, Bridget Macron as a man. And before you know it, you know, Israel is discriminatory because there's a Muslim quarter in Jerusalem. And you just go, is this person really qualified to be commenting on these issues? Was it that, or was it specifically the anti-Semitism stuff?
No, it was, for me, it was the stuff. It was the stuff that was being taken as anti-Semitic. I mean, she had been saying stuff that I've said on the air I don't think is true, like the moon landing was fake, and what was the other one? I can't remember, but the Macron one is a perfect example of things that I just thought, 9/11, she was hinting was kind of an inside job. And these things don't make sense. I've actually researched the ones about the moon and 9/11 only because they were so prevalent. And they don't make sense to me. But at the same time, I don't feel uncomfortable that someone that I'm not connected to is saying those things on the air. But when you start saying things that, you know, they're on the borderline. There's always a way of dodging out of these things. You know, I was just asking questions, or I was just expressing the fact, my feeling that Christ is king. Even if you're dodging them, it seems to me that you would want to make sure that people don't mistake what you're saying for this hatred that has certainly done, in my opinion, just about enough damage. I think we've had just about enough anti-Semitism as we need. I think anti-Semitism is just about topped off, you know?
Now, there's plenty of people who disagree with you, Andrew. I'm going to be honest with you.
Apparently so. To me, my supply of anti-Semitism is just well overdone, you know? And I think that I'm ready to move on to some like obscure group that we can hate without meaning anything. But that was the thing that just made me uncomfortable. That's when for me, it became a moral problem. I don't have any problem with entertaining people. I don't have any problem actually with people who say things that I consider outlandish, you know, to please their audience. It's like it's part of show business. It's not my part of show business, but I understand what that is. But yeah, anti-Semitism is bad stuff, as we now see on our campuses, and it's kind of a joke to me that Hamas, who you know, oppresses women and would kill gays, and leftists who say they support women and gays, and Nick Fuentes, a guy who just hates Jews, that they're all on the same side, you know, and it makes me feel like the anti-Semitism is, as I do believe, I believe it's the sign of something much, much deeper in society.
Yeah. I find it very interesting how we've kind of seen a resurgence of it. I always compare anti-Semitism to herpes. It's always there. And then at a particular moment, especially when society is going through a turbulent period, you then see it come to the fore. I guess the question that I really want to ask, Andrew, is just a clarification on this Christ is King. How is that used in an anti-Semitic way?
Well, I've gotten tweets that say Christ is King Jew, you know, so that's kind of a giveaway for me, you know. Yeah. And the same person who says Christ is King also sends me a picture of Hitler, so to me that's a giveaway. But for instance, if you're in an argument with Ben Shapiro, and you're in a political argument with Ben Shapiro, and your answer is Christ is King, what does that even mean? What does that mean? And it means exactly what it seems to mean, is that you are outside, you're rejected, you know, you are not the people of God any longer, which by the way, theologically, I disagree with on top of everything else. And for me, this is a theological issue. I have to say, I have studied anti-Semitism a lot. I mean, I've looked into it very deeply, because when I realized that I was a Christian, and I'm a Jew, I'm raised a Jew, I'm a Jew by race. And when I realized I was a Christian, one of my biggest resistances was that 2,000 years of Christian anti-Semitism, which has been a real part of the religion, and a really sad part of it. And the thing that I believe sort of blew up in Europe's face when the end of Europe came. And so I needed to, before I could move on, I needed to separate Christian anti-Semitism from Christian love, which I thought was what I was actually had come to believe in. And there is simply no question that by the time Germany was formed, say in the late 1800s, hatred of Jews and hatred of Christ were the same thing. That people were saying, guys like Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, were saying, we've all been turned around by this Christianity because now we're favoring weak people instead of strong people. Obviously morality should be for the strong, and this has all been turned around. And the people who did that were the Jews, and the way it got into our society was through Jesus Christ. And so it was actually, it sounds contradictory, paradoxical, but it's not, that the hatred, my joke is that the hatred of Jews is always really the hatred of the big Jew, and I think that, Christianity, which is an extension of Judaism, that, Christians believe it's the completion of Judaism, is not a natural thing. It's a thing that says, take care of the weak. That women have equal rights. Now, they're not there for your use. They're there for your partnership, These are things that were not natural to the people who became Christians. And I think it became a battle inside their hearts. And I think the thing that kept anti-Semitism alive long after the historical reasons that came out of the split between Christianity and Judaism, which was just an historical fact, long after those things had been healed, it kept it alive because people did not want that big Jew in their heart telling them to be charitable, telling them, no, you can't just march into other people's countries. No, you can't just carry women off and, declare that they're theirs. All these things that had permeated European society against the will of the tribes who were converted, And so I really do believe that to be a Christian and an anti-Semite is a contradiction in terms.
Oh, absolutely, because we're all made in God's image.
Well, that too, yes, yeah.
Has it surprised you seeing all these things, seeing a rise in anti-Semitism? The thing that I've found shocking, Andrew, and I've always somebody who's got my fair share of anti-Semitism, particularly when I'm the fact that I'm not Jewish, but everyone thinks I am. So
that's the worst combination, looking Jewish and not being Jewish.
If it's any consolation, that happened to Charlie Chaplin.
I get called secret Jew, sneaky Jew, fat Jew. That was out of order, all right?
You've lost weight, mate, so that is unfair.
You stepped over the line.
That's when you really pushed it. But, there are people who I used to, enjoy what they did on Twitter and be like, oh, that's, that particular take. I mean, that's a little bit out there, but, it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
And then you go on their Twitter nowadays, you're like, holy, what?
The Jews did 9/11? What?
Yeah, and just going, and just not even that, just being like, yes, what do you expect from Jews? I'm going, what the hell is happening?
Yep. And I really believe in a larger context, putting this in a larger context, we have been taught to look at the history of the West, just take the West alone, without the concept of God in it. To talk about literature without talking about God, even if you don't believe in God, this has nothing to do with faith. I mean, even if you don't understand that the concept of God has shaped the West entirely, the Christian concept, which is ultimately, rooted in Judaism, has shaped the great, to me, the greatest culture that ever existed. The culture of Europe from 1500 to 1914 was, I think, the greatest human culture that has ever existed on Earth, entirely interwoven with this philosophy and this religion. And we've been taught to understand things without it. So you don't really know where you are at any given moment. And then these things, listen, a long, long time ago, in the 1970s, I published a novel in which I referred to my generation of Jews as holiday Jews. And what I meant by that was the Holocaust had so shamed the anti-Semites that decent people just didn't do it, but that would pass. That's what I meant. It's a holiday, hooray, but it'll come back. And it comes back because it is interwoven. It is the shadow side of faith in the real Christ, the Christ of love, the Christ of unity, the Christ that says you are born in God's image and therefore we are, connected in some essential way. And it's the dark shadow of that idea is get out of my house, Jew, which is how it got into the house in the first place, And so it will never go away as long as the West remains the West. And And I think that all you can do is stand up to it and call it what it is. It is a hatred of God, you know? I mean, I love the story I love is John Wayne on his deathbed. He was always being accused of being a bigot, and a friend of his came over who was Jewish, and his son joked with the guy and said, he didn't want to see you because you're a Jew, just kidding around with him. And John Wayne said, the only Jew I don't want to see is the other Jew. I think that's who they hate. They hate the other Jew. And you can't understand. They keep trying to say, well, it's because Jews are successful. But the Jews of Russia weren't successful. They were in these little shtetls and they killed them anyway. You know, they say, well, it's because the Jews want to be off on their own. But the Jews of Germany didn't want to be off on their own. They wanted to assimilate. They thought of themselves as German. All those other explanations simply do not explain why this thing is deathless. And it's deathless because, I believe, because Christ is king, because Christ actually is king. And I think that they hate that. They hate the fact that we are called upon to do something that is unnatural to our flesh, which is love one another and try not to kill each other all the time, you know, and give, you know, leeway to women to become themselves, and remember that even though it's a wonderful thing that we live in a society where the lucky and the successful can be so lucky and so successful, more successful than ever before, not to forget that, you know, some people fall behind, and sometimes it's their own fault. Sometimes, you know, they're there because they haven't done the right things, and somehow we have to care about them as well. And that's a big pain in the neck, and not something that was true of every culture before us. You know?
Andrew, this is why you're one of our favorite guests, because of the depth of analysis and knowledge. And because of that, I hate to drag you back into the tabloidy stuff. Yeah. But the one thing that I will be honest, as someone who's an admirer of everything you guys have built at the Daily Wire, that did trouble me a little bit is this gagging order thing, and, you know, people not being allowed to say what they think and all of this other stuff. And I think, you know, if there is a fair critique, it's that perhaps, you know, new media, which is what we all do, the promise of it was it's the place where everyone can be free and say what they think. And now people are coming together to collaborate under an umbrella, and eventually you get a company policy essentially on what people are and aren't allowed to say. So can you shed any light on that side of things? You know, why is there a gagging order? And is there a kind of like, you know, these are the Overton window is now enforced at a company level? Again, some people might say.
So I know this sounds terrible. It sounds like I'm making this up. I actually don't know anything about the gag order except what I've seen on Twitter. You know, I don't talk to him about those things because I wouldn't be allowed to talk about them on air, and I don't want to lie to my audience, so I just don't ask them. You know, as I understand it, there is a lot of mediation going on in the background that I'm just not privy to, and I don't even know if the story is true. I mean, I'm not saying it's not. I just don't know whether it's true or not. But on the larger issue of the Daily Wire is not social media. It is essentially an on-air magazine. And while you can invite anyone on, you know, I could invite Nick Fuentes on and say, okay, say your piece, pal, and let him talk. We don't have to hire him, and we don't have to pay him to say those things. And when people are saying things that we can no longer support, I mean, the example I gave on the air is if I woke up one morning and said, you know, this abortion idea, I love this abortion idea. I think you should be able to abort your child until he's 5. You know,
Listen, I was a teacher. There's some kids who should have been aborted at the age of even older.
There's no question. There's temptation there, but I would have to resign. I could not go on the air as an employee of the Daily Wire and say that. As an honorable person, I would just have to say, guys, we're no longer on the same page. It is not, the Daily Wire is not required to let every person, to pay every person who wants to say what they have to say it. We're not social media. I believe that social media should be far more open. I mean, YouTube, for instance, I think should legally be required as a common carrier, just like the telephone company, to let every single person speak. But we're not them. We're not a social media company. We're like a magazine. We have an opinion. We have a point of view, and we don't pay leftists to come on and do a show, and we're not going to pay pro-abortion people to do a show. We're not going to pay anti-Semites or anti-blacks or any other kind of bigotry to do a show, even if that's not what's in their heart and it just sounds that way. I don't think we would pay them to do it. I cannot address what's happening behind the scenes,
sure.
and it's just that I just don't know.
I guess the low resolution critique that people might have is, what if Fox News had fired one of their hosts or presenters for saying something that wasn't company policy at Fox News? I imagine some people might say, at the Daily Wire, there would be a lot of criticism of that. People would say this is cancel culture on the right and all the rest of it. That's kind of where I think that there's a fair discussion to be had.
I think the thing about cancel culture, and it is an interesting thing, because I believe that there are things that you should be roundly, attacked for saying, right? I mean,
sure.
I don't think we have to let everybody just scream slurs at one another. But the thing about cancel culture was that it continually redefined common speech as bigoted, and then killed people's careers for it. So if somebody said, for instance, I think homosexuality is a sin, suddenly you were hateful or phobic, instead of communicating thousands of years of traditional theology. So it was that the Overton window was being closed like a little slit, that you had to be this leftist to get through. And that's how I would define cancel culture. The Daily Wire's never been like that. I mean, Jeremy, I know that some of the things that people say make his head explode. He has never, ever come in and said, you can't say that on the air to me. And he's never said, you have to say this. That's just never happened. And so I feel like at some point, a good example of this is Megyn Kelly, who was basically forced off the air for saying that wearing blackface isn't always bigoted, which is obviously true. It's an obvious true thing, because all of the left's comedians have done it and nobody ever said a word about it. But because it was Megyn Kelly, because she's a little bit right of center, she's not that far right of center, but she's a little right of center, it was reason to silence her. That sort of thing has never happened at the Daily Wire. And we have had real arguments, both on air and behind the scenes, always friendly arguments, but intense arguments about where we stand on things. And I think as a conservative website, which is what we are, a conservative on-air magazine, we have a pretty wide range of opinions. I think, we have said a lot of things and disagreed about a lot of things. Nobody has said a word about it. So again, I don't think we are required to say everything. I don't think we're required to pay people to have every point of view. But it's a pretty wide-ranging right-wing site.
So moving on, Andrew, to talk about culture and movies.
The success of the Daily Wire and its emergence as a conservative movie production house is fascinating. Is it a good thing for conservatives to be making conservative art? Are we in danger of entrenching echo chambers?
Whatever you think, the fact of the matter is that just as the film industry has become increasingly polarized, so too has the news landscape. All of this means it's becoming increasingly difficult to get a balanced view of the world.
Ground News offers a solution by providing a comprehensive overview of news stories, complete with the political bias of each source. By understanding how different outlets frame the same story, you can break free from echo chambers and gain a more well-rounded perspective on the issues that matter. Go to ground.news/TRIGGERnometry to check them out.
One Ground News feature we at TRIGGERnometry use is the blind spot feed, which highlights stories disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum. We rely on Ground News to gain a comprehensive understanding of the news stories with various sources and perspectives. Look at this story, for example. Ground News shows us there is zero coverage of this story from publications on the left.
Or this story. The bias comparison feature tells us how left-leaning sources cover the crowd's reaction, emphasizing Trump's controversial analogies and legal troubles, while publications on the right highlight the specifics of his speech.
Comparing perspectives and examining the facts is the best way to discover the truth, and you can't get this type of news analysis anywhere else. So go to ground.news/TRIGGERnometry to get 40% off their unlimited access Vantage plan, which unlocks all the features you see here. By becoming a subscriber, you're directly supporting their mission to bring facts, transparency, and trust back to the news. Are we starting to see the pendulum returning to the center? Both Konstantin and I watched a movie called American Fiction. I don't know if you've seen it.
I did. I liked it.
I thought it was great.
It was magnificent.
It was everything that satire should be.
Right.
It was absolutely on the knuckle. There were some jokes there that I was like, ooh, I haven't felt that in a long while.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
are we starting to see a return to the good old days?
Well, what I feel is happening is that they have lost, but we haven't won. And I feel like we're Hannibal outside the gates of Rome and not moving in. If we had a billionaire, 2 billionaires, willing to invest in culture, and if we had people willing to start thinking about culture, because I don't believe culture should be right-wing. I believe culture should be free. Culture expresses the soul of a nation, the soul of the moment. Sometimes you have culture that I think stinks, but it like abstract art, but it does express the lost soul of the nation in that moment. So we just don't have anybody who knows enough or cares enough to start to say, we are going to get in your face, except the Daily Wire is trying. I mean, they are. Glenn Beck, I think, is trying. Angel Studios have done an enormously good job. They're the religious studio that has that app, The Chosen, which was a smash success. And they moved from that to doing a film called The Sound of Freedom, which is a good, solid thriller about, saving children from trafficking. It has a kind of Christian undertone to it, which is good. But we haven't made the aggressive move that we should, which is like, screw you guys, you're wrong about everything. Now we're going to have an open, free culture where we say whatever we want to say. And we just haven't been able to build yet the Netflix, the Disney that is doing the wicked stuff. In terms of Disney, they're doing the actual evil stuff that they're doing. So it's a good moment. It is a good moment. It is the first buds of spring. Whether it will continue and get better, I don't know, because the right has a harder job than the left. The left wants to sell leftism. I want for the right to sell just reality, what life is really like.
It's a good point, because you go to Austin and you go to Joe Rogan's comedy club, the Comedy Mothership, and what it essentially is it's not political. It's just the comedians make the jokes they want to make and the jokes they believe in, and then the audience laughs or they don't. And that's really what we need. Is we're going to make movies. It's not about left. It's not about right. We're just going to get back to doing what we used to do, the thing that everybody loves, which is great stories.
Right.
That's all that we want. I don't want a right-wing movie. I don't want a left-wing movie, if I'm honest. I just want a great story.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this is, I recently was talking about this on my show, Baby Reindeer.
Yes.
And it's not a great show, but it's a really interesting show. And it's funny because it's about a bisexual being stalked by a fat psychopath woman, and he's upset by that because he wants to date a transsexual. Well, that's good conservative stuff for you. But the obvious despair of all the characters, the obvious fact that they were trapped in this philosophy that says your sexual desires are your identity, which is actually the opposite of the truth. It's actually not the truth, It was so obvious that the writer, Richard Gadd,
Gadd, we know him actually.
Yeah. He was honest enough to portray that. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, to me, that's what an artist does. And he may not be a great artist, but I think it was a good show that actually portrayed that. And I think a little bit more of that is just a good thing. Like the New York Times every other day runs a story about sex in which every form of sex, except maybe married sex, is great. It's great. What could be wrong? What could be wrong? You want to put cigarettes out on your girlfriend? Great. That's as long as she's consent. The two things that they worry about is consent and harm. If the person agrees, it's okay. And if you don't hurt them seriously, it's okay. And I think, is there nothing you could do by consent that doesn't hurt somebody, that degrades them, that degrades yourself? Is sex the only willed human action that exists outside of moral context? And I think that, like, when you tell true stories about people, true things happen. When you tell stories that are actually true, the truth comes out. And I think that was true in Gadd's show. And I appreciated that, even though I found it uncomfortable to watch. I don't actually want to watch a guy romancing a trans woman. but I thought, like, well, I'm this is this guy's honest life, and he's being honest about it, and I'm always willing to show up for that.
And this is a great point, actually, because when people were like, oh, it's about the trans and whatever else, I was like, no, that's actually who Richard is. And I think if you care about art, you care about truth.
Right.
And if somebody's here and is like, I'm going to tell you a story about my life, and maybe it isn't for you, but I'm going to be honest with you about my story.
Right.
It's always going to be compelling, like you said.
That's right. And the problem has been not that we need more honest stories like that, but the fact is there are not a lot of honest stories about other people who aren't those things. And people who think, for instance, there's no story about a guy who's an oil man who's in the right. A businessman who's in the right, a guy who says, listen, I don't hate gay people, but I think it's immoral for the following reasons. And I can be loving about this, but this is what I think. You don't have these stories about religious people that have the depth that I would like to see in those stories. The stories of religious people who actually see the world more honestly than people who aren't religious, which I think in some cases is actually true. And one of the things I've changed my mind about is I hate these Christian movies that are just happy. Everything's happy, you find Jesus and everything's solved, all your problems are solved. But those are very popular. And when you create a popular art form, it attracts talent. And ultimately, I think that'll be transformed into things more like The Sound of Freedom, which is a very difficult movie to watch because it's about child trafficking. I mean, it was very hard to look at, but it had great moments and it was a huge hit, And so I just want 1,000 flowers. I'm like Mao. I want 1,000 flowers to bloom, except without the killing part afterwards.
Andrew, I wanted to ask you about this thing about morality in art, because there's something that happened, and it happened quite a few years ago now, when things like House of Cards and Game of Thrones and other series and movies of that kind started to come out, which were extraordinarily well made. But the one thing that really distinguished them from anything that I'd seen previously was the fact that they were explicitly amoral. They showed a protagonist who was, he wasn't trying to get to some good place or solve some kind of problem or overcome his, flawed nature or have some kind of hero's journey. He was just an evil bastard, and that's what you saw. What happened there? Because to me, that seems like that's something. That's not accident, right?
It's not. I would leave out Game of Thrones for a minute because I think Game of Thrones is actually on its own from those other stories. Mm-hmm. What you saw right around 2000 when there was this wonderful moment of a golden age of television that was caused by the sudden spread. It was an accident. It was caused by the sudden spread of the number of channels. They needed product, and so they were allowing people to do things that they wouldn't have allowed them to do had there still just been 3 networks. So you got The Sopranos, you got The Shield, you got The Wire, you got Breaking Bad, and the one used House of Cards. What those were stories, I feel, that all had the same idea behind them, that in a world where masculinity is outlawed, only outlaws will be masculine. And so you had people who were men who were being men, but they had to be men in opposition to society. And sometimes that meant being evil. And Breaking Bad, if you go back and watch the first episode of Breaking Bad, because in Hollywood, all I ever heard about Breaking Bad was, well, it's really about the fact that he does this for his family. It's not. It's about the fact that he's unmanned. When you meet him, his wife gives him a hand job for his birthday. That's how, that's the kind of relationship he's in. And it's like she's reading while she does it. I mean, it's like, and at the end, he looks at her and says, I'm the one who knocks. I'm the one people are afraid of. He's become a man because that is part of a man. You have to be a little bit willing to do harm where harm is needed. But the only way these guys could express it was as rebels against society, because if you notice before that time, for instance, the private eye had completely disappeared from the American scene, and all shows were about police agencies and government, the FBI or something like that, and they still are. You don't see the lone guy who just goes out and kicks people around to get justice done, which was Mickey Spillane, Mike Hammer, Raymond Chandler, all those guys. So that was a moment, I think, of these men, these frustrated men writing these stories that we all want to see about guys being guys and winning through and doing what they want to do. If you have cowboy movies, then they're the good guys. If you have knights in armor, they're the good guys. But gangsters are the sort of urban expression of that, where they're the bad guys, but they're fighting a corrupt society. They're living in a corrupt society. And so that was a really interesting moment, and it led to this flourishing of television, which is now just about over, unfortunately. Game of Thrones was different because Game of Thrones had the interesting, first of all, as long as it was based on the books, it was great.
Yeah, they ruined it. Yeah,
they ruined it. They were listening to the New York Times, and the New York Times were saying women are being mistreated, and it's like, this is the story. But the thesis behind Game of Thrones is if you don't play the game of power, you die. And so it had good people and it had bad people, but if they didn't play the game of power, they died. And that was shocking, right? I thought it was spectacular. I mean, in the middle of that show, there were times when I cared more about who won the Iron Throne than who won the White House. I was just sitting there on the edge of my seat trying to figure it out because it was such a shocking depiction of a Machiavellian world, and he was honest to that. What was dishonest about Game of Thrones is that it had an entire religious patina without God in it, which was ridiculous. So it had people who were resurrected, and they would say, well, where were you? And I was nowhere. You think, well, how did you come back? From whence did you come back? People would perform magic, but anyone who believed in God would just be instantly wiped out, or would be ineffectual. There was no such thing as a Christian knight, for instance, which in the show. But that's all right. That was his vision, and I was willing to go along with it. And I loved the fact that he was true to it, that he was honest, like you were talking about before. He was honest to his vision. And then the minute they lost control of the books, the minute the original writer was not speaking into the plot, they caved to the New York Times, who was saying, be nicer, show us the equal people, bring us this thing. And that, to me, is the death of art. It's just the death of art. It's just serving. Art has got to have a little bit, you have to have a little bit of religious fervor to do what I do for a living, which is tell the truth no matter what. You have to think some books are going to sell, some books aren't going to sell, but I'm going to show up and do what has to be done. Sometimes the New York Times is going to call me names. They have called me names. It's like, so what? That's what you have to do. And those guys, basically fell apart after they lost their basis of their story.
It's interesting that we use the word nice because, to me, nice isn't a compliment.
Right.
Nice means something else. Nice means to be weak. Nice means to not confront the things that need to be confronted. Nice means that you take the path of least resistance.
Well, in the words of the greatest movie ever made, Roadhouse, he says, be nice until it's time to not be nice. And I think that is kind of the Christian knight. That's the Christian knight. Be nice until it's time to not be nice. And I think that that's what makes that movie so terrific. I can't stop watching that film. It's like an addiction. I love that movie. But yeah.
Andrew, coming back to something you said earlier about needing a billionaire or two, I observe this too, which is I think people, particularly who are waking up to the reality of what the left has become, or people who are just on the right, more generally, who do have those resources, they're quite often not aware of how important culture is. And they're often business guys. They're often people who see things in terms of P&I, right, profit, loss, return, etc. Why does, if it's true, why does the right have a culture problem, if we might frame it that way?
I think there are a couple of reasons. I've thought about this. The only reason I started talking about politics at all was because I felt that the culture had become toxic. While I was living in England for 7 years, I came back and thought, like, what the hell? What are we talking about? Especially after 9/11, when people were saying, like, oh, we kind of deserved it. Why do they hate us? And all this kind of crazy stuff, I think that part of the conservative mindset is to understand that we live in a social fabric. And every part of that fabric is connected so that if you pull one string, it's entirely possible that the entire suit will fall apart. And I'm actually a liberal, I'm a liberal. I'm only a conservative because the conservatives are the liberals now. If you want to say what you mean, if you want to speak plainly, if you want to be an honest guy and be a guy, you have to be a conservative. That's why I'm a conservative. But I don't have that mindset that things can fall apart. I think of looking into the future, like looking at constellations. There are a million stars. You're picking out the shapes. You're picking out the bright stars and making shapes out of them. It doesn't have to be a disaster. If you talk to conservatives, it's always a disaster. It's always an emergency. And the culture doesn't work like that. It's not going to, like somebody's going to make a movie and everybody's going to go, oh, yes, I should be faithful to my wife. That's not what happens. You create an atmosphere the culture creates an atmosphere, and we breathe in that atmosphere. And the left works very, very, very hard at creating an atmosphere in which a religious, family-oriented, freedom-oriented society is bad. They work at it every day, every single day. They are telling you if you're white, if you're a male, if you're masculine, if you are faithful to your wife, if you're a woman, then you're a homemaker. The New York Times, the only time they ever talk about not having sex is in the context of marriage. You can be happy in a marriage without sex. They'll never say that you could be happy anywhere else without having sex. Even while you're reading the article, you should be having sex unless you're married, right? They work very, very hard to create this atmosphere because they understand what it is. They have time, they have patience. They started doing this 65 years ago, and it only has come to fruition now. We are always in a hurry, conservatives, because we always see everything's falling apart. And, I'm a Burkean in this regard. I believe that change is going to come. And what I want is for change to come in keeping with our traditions. It doesn't mean some traditions are going to fall by the wayside, some things get out of date. But you change in keeping with your principles, right? But there are a lot of conservatives whose conservatism consists of trying to bring back their childhood. I know conservatives who think the great days of America were the 1990s. And I go, really? But that's when they grew up. So that's what they want to bring back. And that is a mindset that's always in a panic because things are always changing, I'm living in a world so different from the world I grew up in. It's almost like I come from another planet. But a lot of it has been good. A lot of the changes have been great and have been positive. And it's only in recent years that some things that have risen that I think are genuinely destructive and genuinely prone to destruction. So we're always panicking, and culture is a slow game. Culture is the long game.
That point you made about the atmosphere, I think, is really interesting because we had a comedian called Steve Hughes, who I doubt you would have heard of, on the show a long time ago. And he said something that really stuck with me about how, we in the UK, we watch American movies and we have this idea of people in the Deep South as these rednecks and whatever. Exactly. And how do you know that? What if they're yes sir, no sir, very polite, etc.? And having the opportunity to travel around the United States as we now do, and I had the chance to be in a lot of places that most people wouldn't go, Oklahoma and places like that. You see that what he said is exactly true. But if your idea of what America is comes from Hollywood, which for most people, especially around the world, it absolutely does, and people in America, by the way, who may not have traveled very much, then it starts to make sense why we see everything the way that we do from that cultural lens, because it's very disfiguring to reality, that lens.
This is one of the formative experiences of my life. When I was a boy, I wanted to be a drifter. That was actually my ambition. I loved stories like, about wanderers, Shane, and then came Bronson was a television show on the air. That any story that had a wanderer in it, I would watch the TV show, I would read the book. I just loved that, and I suffer from wanderlust. I still do. I still move around more than most people do, and I just started traveling around the country. And I slept in hobo camps, and I slept in cheap hotels, and I slept in my car, and I just went everywhere. I went to every state except for some reason South Dakota, which is the only state I've never been to, and I was a New York guy. I lived 20 minutes in a suburb 20 minutes outside of New York. What I knew was what you're talking about. I knew that this Southern sheriffs would arrest you if you were black, and they were bigots, and we were the good guys, and we were sophisticated, and it was all a lie. And I saw it. I saw it was all a lie. I talked to people from every level of society all around the country. Sometimes I was with bums and hobos and hobo camps, but I could also sometimes amass enough money to stay at nicer places. I met all kinds of people, and I realized it's all untrue. It's just all, like every word of it is untrue. And of course you can do that to anybody, right? You can always show the bad guys in any society and then the good guys in another society without lying, right? You don't have to lie because, sure, there's a bigoted sheriff in the South somewhere. You can tell that story. But it's kind of like they did during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. They would tell a story about an American soldier raping a woman and say, well, this really happened. You go like, okay, it really happened, but there were 250,000 troops over there. That's a city full of people. They're going to be bad guys. Are those the only people you're going to show us? And yes, that's the answer. Yes, those are the only people they're going to show us. If they're doing the South, if they're doing the country, they still talk like this. I talk to liberals. Because of my upbringing, I still know a lot of liberals who are lovely people, absolutely lovely people. But when you talk to them about the Trump supporters, the people who show up, and there are hundreds of thousands to see this guy, they think every single one of them is a shotgun packing bigot who can't put a sentence together. And I keep saying, I've had dinner with them. I know them. I talk to them. That's not who they are. But are there those guys in there? Sure. But there's always bad guys in every cohort. So it's appalling. And the fact that the news media, if you just watch them demographically, they now almost entirely live on the coasts. Hollywood is in Hollywood. All of these, government is in Washington. They do not know what they do not know. I mean, Nancy Pelosi was at Oxford the other day and was talking about these people just don't understand what's good for them. She's in San Francisco. Her city is falling apart. Her city is an absolute crap show. And she doesn't even walk outside her door and think, maybe there shouldn't be this many people living on the streets, But she knows that in Oklahoma, in Arkansas, she knows what the problem is there, And that's what culture does. And that is the problem. That's why what you said before is exactly where I stand, is the problem is not that the left makes movies. It's that they blacklist the right. And we've let them do it. It's not their fault. They're small-minded, horrible people. They are following their nature. But we have not built the machinery to fight back. I mean, we have no awards. We don't give people awards. We have no reviews. We have no bookstores. We don't even build social media. Everybody who's built social media is on the left as well. You can't just sit around and whine, about that. You have to build stuff. And these guys, the people on the right tend to complain, and their media is about complaining, about attacking. It's never about here, yeah, maybe there is a problem with Jeff Bezos having $1 gazillion and the guys who work for Jeff Bezos can't take a bathroom break. Maybe that is a problem. Maybe, capitalism doesn't solve every problem. I mean, like I'm happy for Jeff Bezos to make $1 billion, but the people who work for him should be treated like human beings. Maybe capitalism doesn't handle that. And maybe we should sit down with people in the middle left and say, okay, we don't want to give government more power, but maybe, this is something that actually needs to be rejiggered a little bit. We never do that. It's always just, hold the line, keep the line, so nothing changes and everything changes. And so it's a losing battle,
Yeah, and it's also as well, I've come to this conclusion because through doing TRIGGERnometry, I talked to a lot of people on the right. I don't think they get culture. No. I don't think they get it, really, that they don't. In the same way, there's people on the right who've got a great sense of humor, but there's a lot of people on the right who are so earnest, you make a joke and it... Whoosh.
Well, going back to that baby reindeer thing, because he was honest about that, I ended up watching the show having a heart for him. When the show started, I almost turned it off because when I thought, he's going out with a trans guy and this guy, he's basically enticing this person to stalk him, and then I thought, no, but he's telling the truth about his experience. Yeah. Now I have a heart for the guy, and you have to have to me, it doesn't cost you anything to see another person's point of view if the person's not trying to kill you. I mean, that's where, that's why I go after YouTube so hard. They're really doing something wrong. They're taking a common carrier and censoring 50% of the country. But I don't go after the guy who's on YouTube saying something I disagree with. I'll go after his ideas, but it's not him that I hate. And culture is always, art is always culture critical. It's always pointing out things that are a tension between culture and the human spirit. So it's always going to have some kind of criticism to put forward. And it's always going to give you a heart for people that you don't like and know. That's the whole point of it. The point about art is it gives you 1 million lives. You read 100 books, you've got 100 new consciousnesses inside you. And yeah, there are conservatives who are conservative in the sense that they don't want to let that in. And that's unfortunate. The left handles that by simply silencing everybody they don't want to hear, which is in a way more dangerous. So you have on the one, we're talking about specific people on the right and specific people on the left. The left wants to silence the right wants to close their eyes to the left. And that's a bad combination for the right, because it means the left will make art and the right won't.
That was the objection I was actually going to make to your point, Francis, because we were talking about this the other night. There's actually quite a lot of conservative actors or centrist actors in Hollywood who have like secret gatherings, like they're the Freemasons or something.
Yes. I was in those, yeah.
What were they like? Is there a secret handshake?
No, they were like going to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. I used to complain about them. I was in them because I thought it was the beginning of something good. There was the famous one was Friends of Abe, which was kind of formed in part by Gary Sinise. And I used to say to him, if we're in secret, we're sort of saying that we're wrong. And Gary, who's one of the nicest human beings, one of the best human beings in Hollywood, bar none.
I mean, that's not saying much, though, is it?
No, okay, that's damning him with faint praise. But he's actually also a very nice human being. But he was worried about the guys who didn't have a platform. So he was worried about the grip. He was worried about the guy who was behind the camera, who, if he got fired, had nowhere to go. So he didn't want to expose those people. But the problem is, you were literally going to meetings and going, "My name is Andrew, and I'm a conservative. Hi, Andrew," like an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. Whereas the left was getting up at the Oscars and saying, "Screw Donald Trump." Then it was George W. Bush. Screw George W. Bush. And that is a problem. But I did see the problem. I understood that these people were getting fired. Black conservatives in Hollywood are treated like dirt. I mean, they would tell stories that your eyes would fill up listening to the things that had happened to them because they had committed the double sin of being black while conservative,
And what would happen to them? I haven't heard the story.
They would either have to keep their mouth shut or they would be abused beyond. I mean, well, look at the way they're treating Clarence Thomas. That's happening out in the open without having to expose anybody. Clarence Thomas is one of the best Supreme Court justices we've ever had, an honest guy with an open point of view. You know exactly what Thomas thinks. They treat him like he's a criminal, and they do that because he is. I can't decide whether it's being conservative while black or being black while conservative, but it's one of those two that they just can't stand because their entire idea of themselves is that they love the little guy. But if you're black and conservative, if you're gay and conservative, if you're women and conservative, they treat you like dirt, And again, this is talking about a group of these people. In the middle, most people don't know that much about politics. And they just want to be nice, They want everything to go well. And so when somebody says, "Well, we're going to give money to these people," they think, "Oh, that's nice," And you don't think, "Well, where's that money coming from? Where did you get the right to take that money from somebody else and give it to this person?" And those are debates we never have because the left has taken over the communications industry.
And that's why Ricky Gervais's speech at the Golden Globes was so powerful and it resonated. And it got, however, hundreds of millions of views and went super viral. And it continues to go viral because he hit the nail on the head.
I mean, these are people who have been married 4 times. Their kids are in rehab. They're in rehab. And they're going to get up and tell me that I'm a bad person for thinking, "You know what, I think Donald Trump is better than Hillary Clinton." I mean, it's Hillary Clinton, for crying out loud. Yeah. A plant would have been better than Hillary Clinton. So why are they preaching to me when their talent is to entertain me? It's not that they don't have a right. It's not that they don't have a right to their ideas. It's not that they don't have a right to express their ideas. But the fact that they have this vast platform on which they express their ideas and that we take them seriously, you just think, shut up and dance. I mean, that's, yeah.
But it's also as well, you look at films like American Fiction, for instance, or The Joker. The Joker isn't left wing. No. I mean, it's actually, what it's talking about is something else entirely. And that really struck a chord with people. And it made a huge amount of money.
Right.
So you're going, you've seen the potential. Surely capitalism is going to kick in at some point. And one of these studio heads is going to go, "You know what? I just want to make money."
Yeah, you'd think. But the reason it doesn't, though, is there's a whole other force. And people never... I was once sitting at a table with Ted Cruz, Senator Ted Cruz, and he started asking people, "What do you know that other people don't know?" And he came to me and I said, what I know that other people don't know is that it's not about the money. It's not about the money. The people in Hollywood, they want girls. They want money, but they'll make money. They're going to make money because the way the system works no longer depends on box office. It depends on too many other myriad of things. So they're going to make money for as long as they're in the game. And they care about prestige. They care about awards. This is what I say when I say the right has no awards. You stand up and win an Oscar. No one can take that away from you. You now are an Oscar-winning actor, right? So you get up and tell 50% of the country to buzz off, it doesn't mean a thing to you. Like, sure, your next movie is not going to make, Christian Bale made a movie about Moses. There's a whole huge passel of people who would sweep into that movie. And he gets up and says, well, Moses was a terrorist, and the movie dies, It's not about the money. It's about this sense that they have of being a virtuous person. Listen, if you have a life like mine, where you have made a living creating things, you are one of the luckiest bastards on the face of the earth. And if you have a problem with that, the fact that, a guilt problem with that, expressing your virtue is a big deal. It becomes very important. Fortunately for me, I think I am the exact right person to be lucky. I think I'm not one of the nicest people I know. They should just shower me with gold. But if you have a problem with that and you don't feel important enough, this is a thing that affects comedians. Mm-hmm. Comedians get to be 50 and suddenly they want to send you a message. And I think what happened to me laughing while you were talking? You were talking, I was laughing, and now suddenly you're telling me what I should be thinking. It's like, where did that transition happen? Because they feel unimportant. They just feel like they're entertainers. I have to tell you, John Irving, the guy who wrote World According to Garp, said the stupidest thing I've ever heard an artist say. He said, I sometimes wish I were in the Soviet Union because they take art seriously, because they kill you if you do say the wrong thing, And I thought, I'll be happy to come to your house and attach a wire to your testicles and electrocute you, if that'll make you feel more important. But, when you're in America and when you can say, you used to, within 20 years ago, you used to be able to say anything you want. And now it's getting to be so you can say anything you want again, really. You feel unimportant. And I think it makes them feel important and virtuous. And you cannot underestimate how much that drives Hollywood.
Wow. Well, Andrew, it's been an absolute pleasure having you back. We're going to go to locals where our audience get to ask you their questions in a second. Before we do, we always end with the same question. What's the one thing we're not talking about that we should be?
Oh, wow. God.
Same thing as always with Andrew.
Same thing as always, but not religion. Not religion. I don't care about religion. I care about religion because religion is a vehicle by which we talk about God. But why? I just wrote this thing. I'm doing this wonderful Substack, and if your audience can go with my son Spencer, we're sending emails back and forth talking about religion, which we've been doing since he was a little kid. We've been doing it in person. Now we're doing it in emails, and we are both amazed at this site. It's called The New Jerusalem, thenewjerusalem.substack.com. And the thing that I talked about today in my letter today was the way people refer to Nietzsche as if he had invented a new scientific idea which changed everything. Nietzsche had a brilliant insight, which is that the collapse of Christianity was going to cause a collapse of the moral order. Dostoevsky had the same insight. Dostoevsky was a Christian, and he said, this is a disaster. Nietzsche, it's very hard to make out what he was saying, but he said, this is what is going to happen. And people say, well, now that there's been Nietzsche, we can no longer establish right and wrong. Now that there's been Nietzsche, we can no longer talk about these things. And I think he didn't discover that the earth goes around the sun. He had a philosophical point of view, And from Nietzsche comes Foucault and comes woke and comes intersectionalism and all the things, all the plagues that come out of that. And we need to be asking the question, well, was Nietzsche right that there was no God? Was his opinion, is his opinion not to be challenged? Is the only way we can challenge it by becoming small-minded, fundamentalists who believe that every word in the Bible has to be interpreted only in one way? Is that the only response we have? Do we not have a response of intellectuals? And I just want to finish this by just saying, for over 10 years, I have been predicting that there would be a revival of religion from the top, the intellectual top. And I know you guys have talked to Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Russell Brand. All these people who were very staunch atheists are changing their tune. And I think that this is an important moment. I think this is a real transition. And I do want to also yell at you about your interview with Richard Dawkins, but I'll save that for another time.
Oh, no. Actually, we can do that on Locals.
Okay.
If you want to see Andrew yell at us about not Andrew Dawkins, I don't even know.
Who is Andrew
Who's
Dawkins?
These are the guys waiting outside.
We're going to talk about him as well. If you want to watch Andrew yell at us about our interview with Richard Dawkins, go to Locals. But before we go there, I will say, I actually think you make some interesting points about that. Not least, I just spent 3 weeks on tour with Jordan Peterson. And he brought me along specifically from an agnostic perspective to try and argue with him. And you can see that whether it's God exactly that people want from him, he's talking about God to some extent, but not only that. What people want most of all from him is the moral order.
Right.
They want to know how to know what to do and how to avoid doing the things that they know not to do. That's really it. I think that's a big inquiry of our time, frankly.
And I will say that I know this because I was baptized at the age of 49, and I thought about this for a long time. There is no moral order without God. You can't do it. You can't get there. I've been down every road trying to construct it. You can't do it. Jordan asked me, I had on his show, I had an interview with Jordan, and he said, can you build a moral order from evolution? And I said, no, because a moral order is about what you're willing to die for. And there's no evolutionary construct in which you're willing to die for transubstantiation. That's not good for evolution, but people are willing to do it, and sometimes they're right to do it.
Right, I'm going to yell at you about that, but on Locals. Head on over to Locals right now.
Where you see us slag off Andrew Dawkins.
Whoever that is.
Yeah, he's getting it in the neck.
I hate that guy.
We all hate that guy.